Picture this: the greatest treasure trove of knowledge the ancient world had ever known, engulfed in flames, the Library of Alexandria, a beacon of human intellect, reduced to ashes, taking with it countless scrolls filled with wisdom that shaped civilizations. But here's the haunting truth: not all its secrets vanished that day. Some mysteries linger, whispers of lost discoveries and unanswered questions that have eluded historians for centuries. What if I told you the burning was just the beginning of the story, that hidden within the ashes are 25 enigmas so profound they continue to baffle experts even now? Alexandria wasn't just a city, it was the beating heart of the ancient world's imagination, a place where philosophers, scientists, and scholars gathered under one roof, pushing the boundaries of what humanity understood. The library stood as a monument to curiosity, housing works from every corner of the known world, yet for all its grandeur, its destruction left behind a void, one filled with tantalizing gaps in our history. Who were the brilliant minds behind its most revolutionary texts? What groundbreaking ideas were lost before they could change the world? And why, after all this time, do some of its most guarded secrets refuse to be uncovered? This isn't just a story about fire and ruin, it's a journey into the unknown, a chance to step into the shadows of history and piece together fragments of a legacy that refuses to fade. From rumored blueprints of impossible inventions to scrolls containing knowledge that predates modern science by millennia, the Library of Alexandria's unsolved riddles are more than mere footnotes. They're gateways to understanding how much we've lost and what might still be waiting to be found. So join me as we unravel 25 of its most enduring mysteries, each one a thread in the tapestry of human ingenuity, and each one a reminder that some secrets are too powerful to disappear forever. Among the most tantalizing mysteries hidden within the Library of Alexandria's ashes were the legendary blueprints of Archimedes' ingenious designs so ahead of their time, they still spark debate among engineers today. Imagine scrolls detailing machines like his fabled Death Ray, a device said to harness sunlight to set enemy ships ablaze, or the revolutionary water screw, an early pump that transformed irrigation. These weren't just myths. Ancient historians like Plutarch and Galen wrote of their existence, yet the original technical documents vanished when the library burned. What makes their loss so haunting is the precision behind them. Archimedes didn't just dream, he calculated, tested, and perfected. His works bridged mathematics and mechanics in ways that wouldn't be replicated for centuries. Modern researchers have tried piecing together these lost marvels from scattered descriptions, with mixed results. Take the Death Ray, skeptics long dismissed it as legend, until a team from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology attempted to reconstruct it using mirrors. In 2005, they managed to ignite a wooden boat replica under controlled conditions, proving the concept wasn't entirely far-fetched. Yet without Archimedes' exact schematics, we'll never know if his design matched their interpretation. Similarly, the water screw's principles survive in agricultural tools today, but the original mechanism's efficiency remains unmatched. Some scholars even speculate the library held prototypes for devices like his celestial globe, a mechanical model of the heavens so accurate, it predicted planetary movements. What's truly staggering is how much of his genius might have been lost forever. The library likely housed not just finished designs, but notes on his thought process, failed experiments, incremental breakthroughs, the kind of raw innovation that could rewrite our understanding of ancient engineering. Every reconstruction attempt is a gamble, a puzzle missing its central pieces, and that's the enduring tragedy of Alexandria's fall. It wasn't just books that burned, it was the roadmap to a scientific revolution cut short, leaving us to wonder how different history might look if even one of those scrolls had survived. Beneath the grand arches of the Library of Alexandria, one figure stood as both a guardian of knowledge and a target of controversy: Hypatia, the brilliant mathematician and philosopher whose private teachings sparked whispers of rebellion. While her public lectures drew crowds, it was her clandestine lessons that historians believe held the most explosive ideas. Stories passed down through fragments of letters and second-hand accounts suggest she taught advanced astronomical theories that contradicted the prevailing religious views of her time. Imagine dusty scrolls unfurled in candle-lit rooms, where Hypatia revealed celestial movements so precise they undermined the idea of divine intervention in the heavens. Her calculations on planetary orbits, lost to the flames, may have predated Kepler's laws by over 1,000 years. What makes her lost manuscript so tantalizing is the political firestorm they ignited. Church leaders saw her work as a direct challenge to their authority, accusing her of spreading knowledge that turns men away from God. One surviving account describes a student's desperate attempt to smuggle out a coded notebook containing her theories on conical sections, a mathematical concept so advanced it wouldn't be fully explored again until the Renaissance. Some scholars speculate these notes included early blueprints for astrolabes or even rudimentary heliocentric models, ideas that would have been heresy in 5th century Alexandria. The irony: Hypatia herself never openly denounced religion. She simply believed numbers and stars spoke a truth beyond human doctrine. Theories about her suppressed work range from the plausible to the extraordinary. A 9th century Arabic text references a mysterious woman of Alexandria who devised a method for predicting solar eclipses with eerie accuracy. Could this have been Hypatia's lost formula? Others point to stray passages in Byzantine archives hinting at her experiments with primitive lenses, possibly attempting to magnify celestial bodies centuries before telescopes existed. Then there's the most provocative theory of all, that she'd uncovered flaws in Ptolemy's geocentric model long before Copernicus, but her findings were systematically erased. Today all we have are echoes, a half-burned page here, a disputed annotation there, leaving us to wonder how much closer we'd be to the stars if her voice hadn't been silenced. The 123 plays Sophocles penned, each one a masterpiece woven with the raw humanity that defined Greek tragedy. Only 7 have survived the march of time, leaving us to grapple with the haunting question: what brilliance was lost when Alexandria's flames consumed the rest? The surviving works, like Oedipus Rex and Antigone, are literary pillars, yet they represent a mere fraction of his genius. Imagine the untapped depth of stories that once filled those library shelves, plays that might have rewritten our understanding of ancient drama. Among the missing were rumored sequels to Oedipus Rex, potentially continuing the doomed king's saga beyond the climactic horror of his self-blinding. Did Sophocles explore Oedipus' later years in exile, or the fates of his children in even darker detail? The fragments we've recovered hint at cycles of plays, interconnected tragedies that would have rivaled modern cinematic universes in their narrative ambition. One tantalizing clue comes from a 2nd century scholar's offhand mention of a play titled Oedipus at Colonus, long before the version we know today was rediscovered. Was this an entirely different ending to the myth, or part of a broader trilogy now erased? Then there's the enigmatic Tereus, a play so graphically violent that ancient critics claimed audiences fainted during performances. Surviving summaries describe a feast of horrifying revenge, a queen serving her husband their own son's flesh, a story that pushed boundaries even by Greek standards. Without the full text, we're left piecing together its cultural impact from shocked reactions alone, but the losses go beyond shock value. Sophocles was a pioneer of character psychology, crafting protagonists whose flaws felt unnervingly modern. A papyrus scrap from Alexandria mentions the lovers of Achilles, a play exploring the hero's relationship with Patroclus through dialogue so intimate it challenged contemporary norms of masculinity. Another fragment references The Harvesters, a rare comedy amid his tragedies, proving his range was far broader than we assumed. The library's catalog even listed plays based on obscure local myths, stories that might have revealed how Athenian drama intertwined with regional folklore. What makes these gaps so agonizing is how they distort our view of Greek theater. We study Sophocles through a keyhole, unaware of the full panorama behind the door. The 7 surviving plays skew toward royalty and fate, but recovered titles like The Weavers and The Slave suggest he also gave voice to commoners in ways his contemporaries ignored. Even more intriguing are hints that he experimented with structure plays narrated by choruses of women, or endings where the gods didn't intervene. These lost works weren't just entertainment, they were blueprints for how stories could shape society, asking questions about justice, power, and identity that feel startlingly relevant today. The real tragedy isn't just that Alexandria burned, it's that we'll never know how many of our modern narratives were anticipated, and perhaps outshone, by a genius whose full vision turned to ash. Even the most basic question about the Library of Alexandria, how much knowledge it actually held, sparks debates that have raged for centuries. Ancient sources can't seem to agree on whether its shelves groaned under the weight of 400,000 scrolls, or a staggering 700,000. The discrepancy isn't just a matter of historical bookkeeping, it's a window into how the library became more myth than reality, even while it stood. Take the accounts of 2 first-century scholars. Seneca the Younger claimed the library housed 400,000 volumes when Caesar's forces accidentally set fire to the docks in 48 BCE, while a century later, Aulus Gellius insisted the number was closer to 700,000. These aren't minor rounding errors. That 300,000 gap represents enough lost text to fill multiple modern universities. What explains the wild variance? For starters, scrolls weren't standardized like today's books. A single work like Homer's Iliad might span multiple scrolls, while a philosophical treatise could be condensed into one. Some historians argue Seneca's count referred only to completed works, excluding duplicates, drafts, or imported commercial texts, while Gellius might have tallied every scrap of parchment in the building. Then there's the library's sprawling annexes, satellite collections in temples and royal palaces that may or may not have been counted in official estimates. The Mausian, the research institute attached to the library, reportedly kept its own private archives of experimental notes and lecture transcripts. Were these considered part of the main collection, or hidden troves known only to scholars? The confusion deepens when we examine how these numbers were recorded. Many later historians, like the 5th century Orosius, were copying figures from earlier sources that no longer exist, sources potentially biased toward glorifying Alexandria's prestige. Even the library's own catalog, the Pinaques, which famously organized works by genre and author, didn't survive to clarify matters. Some scholars propose the higher number includes scrolls seized from visiting ships, a controversial practice where any text entering Alexandria's harbor was confiscated, copied, and sometimes kept rather than returned. Others suggest the counts reflect different eras: 400,000 during the library's peak under the Ptolemies, swelling to 700,000 after annexing rival collections like Pergamons. What's rarely disputed is the implication of these numbers. Whether the true count leaned toward the conservative or extravagant estimate, the loss represents an incalculable hole in humanity's shared memory. To put it in perspective, the largest surviving repository of Greek and Roman texts today, the Vatican Library, holds around 75,000 manuscripts, a fraction of even Alexandria's most modest alleged holdings. Those missing scrolls weren't just duplicates or ledgers. They included unique works like Aristotle's lost dialogues, eyewitness accounts of Alexander's campaigns, and Babylonian astronomical records that might have rewritten scientific history. The fire didn't just erase books, it erased entire ways of thinking, and that's the real tragedy lurking behind those competing numbers. We'll never know just how much we'll never know. Buried deep within the Library of Alexandria's archives lay a collection so revolutionary, It could have redrawn the world centuries before the age of exploration, the lost geography section. Ancient accounts describe meticulously detailed world maps, some stretching across entire scrolls, depicting lands as distant as Scandinavia and sub-Saharan Africa with eerie precision. These weren't just static drawings, they were dynamic records annotated with wind patterns, trade routes, and even tidal calculations. The most famous among them was the work of Eratosthenes, the scholar who first calculated Earth's circumference with a margin of error under 2%, a feat unmatched until the Renaissance. His original maps and the travel logs that informed them, crammed with observations from Phoenician sailors and Silk Road caravans, vanished when the library burned. But here's what stuns modern researchers: fragments of his calculations survived in second-hand texts, revealing methods so advanced, they hint at a network of global knowledge we've only begun to reconstruct. One surviving parchment mentions a device called the geoscope, a brass instrument used to measure angles between coastal landmarks, essentially an ancient theodolite. Scholars believe Eratosthenes employed these tools alongside sailor testimonials to chart the Mediterranean with accuracy that wouldn't be rivaled until the 18th century. Even more intriguing are references to a world grid system, a coordinate framework predating latitude and longitude by nearly 2 millennia. A Byzantine scholar's passing remark suggests the library housed a three-dimensional model of the known world, complete with adjustable mountain ranges and movable river channels, a tactile teaching tool for navigators and generals. Then there's the mystery of the phantom continents. A 9th-century Arabic text quotes a lost Alexandrian geographer describing lands beyond the Pillars of Hercules, possibly the Americas, citing accounts from Carthaginian explorers who sailed westward for 90 days. Another fragment alludes to a southern landmass shrouded in mist, eerily resembling Antarctica. Were these educated guesses, or evidence of pre-Columbian transoceanic contact? Without the original maps, we're left parsing whispers. The real tragedy isn't just that we lost the maps themselves, but the methodology behind them. Eratosthenes didn't work in isolation. He built on centuries of Phoenician star charts, Mesopotamian clay tablets, and Indian Ocean trade logs, all reduced to ash. Modern geographers still grapple with the implications. His calculations relied on knowing the exact distance between Alexandria and Syene, a measurement derived from now lost military marching records. How many other data points, painstakingly gathered over generations, fueled the library's cartographic mastery? Perhaps most haunting is what these maps represented, not just geography, but a worldview. The library's scholars seem to have understood Earth as a unified system long before the concept of globalism existed. One account describes a climate map correlating rainfall patterns with crop yields across 3 continents, an early attempt at ecological modeling. Another mentions animal migration charts so precise, they predicted seasonal wildlife movements. These weren't static artifacts, they were living documents, updated annually by teams of scribes who collated reports from merchants, soldiers, and diplomats. The loss resonates today as we struggle to piece together ancient trade networks or track historical climate shifts. That missing geography section wasn't just a collection of maps, it was the ancient world's internet, a dynamic database of human and natural patterns that could have accelerated scientific progress by 1,000 years. Hidden beneath the library's marble halls lay scrolls that blurred the line between science and magic, the fabled Hermetic texts, a trove of alchemical formulas and esoteric knowledge attributed to the mythic figure Hermes Trismegistus. These weren't mere superstitions, they were rigorous explorations of matter and transformation that eerily foreshadowed modern chemistry. The library's copies, said to include original Egyptian treatises on metallurgy and dye-making, vanished without a trace, leaving behind only cryptic references in later Arabic and medieval manuscripts. What makes their loss so profound is how they resurface centuries later, fragmentary and distorted, sparking the very Renaissance breakthroughs that might have unfolded 1,000 years earlier if Alexandria's originals had survived. Take the legendary Emerald Tablet. Its most famous passage, "As above, so below," later became the foundation of alchemical thought, but the library's version reportedly contained detailed commentaries on mineral transmutation, including techniques for purifying metals that industrial-age chemists would painstakingly rediscover. One second-hand account describes a recipe for creating liquid silver that modern researchers suspect was an early form of mercury extraction, a process pivotal to later inventions like thermometers and barometers. Even more tantalizing are whispers of a lost hermetic volume on distillation, a technique critical to everything from perfume making to pharmacology. When Arabic alchemists like Jabir ibn Hayyan finally reconstructed these methods in the 8th century, they credited ancient Alexandrian sources as their inspiration, hinting at how much deeper the original knowledge ran. The Hermetic texts weren't just about practical recipes. They framed the universe as a web of interconnected forces, a worldview that later influenced Newton's studies of gravity and magnetism. Historians have pieced together traces of this philosophy from quotes in surviving Greek and Syriac texts, references to sympathies between celestial and earthly elements that sound remarkably like early hypotheses about atomic attraction. One fragment mentions an experiment where lodestone and iron filings were used to map invisible force fields, a precursor to electromagnetic research. Another alludes to a theory of primary matter that bore striking similarities to the later concept of elements, but perhaps the greatest mystery lies in how these ideas might have accelerated scientific progress. Consider this: the library's alchemical scrolls reportedly included methods for creating sulfuric acid, a cornerstone of modern chemistry. Without those instructions, the process had to be reinvented in medieval Europe through dangerous trial and error. The same goes for glass-making formulas that could have revolutionized lenses and lab equipment centuries before Galileo. Even the mythic philosopher's stone may have roots in a misunderstood Alexandrian text on catalytic reactions, one that, if preserved, might have steered alchemy away from fruitless gold-seeking and toward genuine chemical discovery. The tragedy isn't just that these texts burned, it's that their absence forced humanity to spend a millennium relearning what the library's scholars had already begun to map out, a delay that might have changed everything from medicine to metallurgy. Every time a Renaissance thinker like Paracelsus pored over a garbled Hermetic quote, they were grasping at shadows of a system far more sophisticated than they could imagine. And that's the real cost of Alexandria's flames. Not just lost knowledge, but lost time, centuries of it. Between the scrolls of philosophy and astronomy, the Library of Alexandria housed a lesser-known treasure, the Bibliothek Magirique, a culinary archive so vast, it was said to contain the flavors of every civilization touched by Alexander's empire. This wasn't just a cookbook, it was a gastronomic atlas, documenting spice routes, fermentation methods, and even the etiquette of royal feasts from Macedonia to the Indus Valley. The head librarian Callimachus reportedly dedicated an entire wing to these texts, recognizing food as both science and cultural memory. Imagine parchment after parchment detailing honey-glazed Mesopotamian duck, Nubian sorghum beers brewed in sacred vessels, or Persian rice dishes layered with saffron and barberries, recipes that would have rewritten our understanding of ancient diets, if even a single page had survived. What made this collection revolutionary was its precision. Unlike the vague handful of grain instructions found in other ancient texts, Alexandrian cooks worked with standardized measures. A fragmentary Greek shopping list references something called an oinometer, a clay vessel marked with lines to measure wine reductions for sauces with near-scientific consistency. Other accounts describe color-coded scrolls, red for royal banquets, blue for medicinal foods, black for preservation techniques, Among the most mourned losses is the Salt Book, a manual on curing meats and fish using methods from Carthage's coastal smokehouses to Himalayan salt caves. Modern food historians suspect it contained the earliest known recipe for garum, the fermented fish sauce that fueled Rome's legions, but with variations leveraging local ingredients from Alexandria's bustling port. The library's version likely included chemical observations about fermentations, effects notes that could have accelerated food science by centuries. Then there were the exotic ingredients meticulously catalogued. A first-century poet's satire mentions the library's spice scroll, a ledger tracking rare imports like Malabar peppercorns and Somali cinnamon alongside their medicinal properties. Cross-referenced with surviving ship manifests, we know these items reached Alexandria, but how were they used? A Byzantine physician's throwaway line about Alexandrian sweetmeats made with frost-like sugar hints at early Indian sugarcane processing techniques, lost when the library burned. Even more intriguing are whispers of a cooking for the gods section, detailing temple offerings like honey-drizzled ox hearts roasted in sacred copper braziers, dishes that blurred the line between kitchen and ritual. The real tragedy lies in the techniques that vanished. One Arabic text from the 9th century references a long-lost Alexandrian invention, an earthenware cold box layered with wet straw and desert salts, capable of chilling dishes to near freezing in Egypt's heat and ancient proto-refrigerator. Another describes a dough-kneading machine powered by water wheels, used in the library's bakery to supply scholars daily bread. These weren't just recipes, they were blueprints for culinary technology that wouldn't resurface until the Industrial Revolution. Perhaps most poignant is what the cookbook represented: a tangible thread connecting humanity across cultures. When a Greek scribe transcribed a Phoenician fish stew recipe, or an Egyptian scribe adapted a Bactrian mutton roast, they were doing more than preserving food. They were proving that even in an age of empires and wars, people could still gather at the same table, united by the simple, enduring magic of a shared meal. The medical wing of the Library of Alexandria held scrolls that could have rewritten the history of human health, none more devastating to lose than the complete works of Herophilus, the revolutionary anatomist who dared to dissect human cadavers when others still relied on animal studies. His lost encyclopedia wasn't just a textbook, it was a map of the human body so detailed, it reportedly identified the nerves controlling speech and traced the pulse's connection to the heart over 2,000 years before these concepts were rediscovered. While fragments of his theories survive in second-hand accounts, the original texts filled with illustrations, surgical techniques, and pharmacological formulas vanished in the library's flames. What makes their absence so haunting is how advanced they were for their time. Herophilus didn't just describe organs, he categorized them by function, proposing systems of circulation and digestion that wouldn't be proven until the Renaissance. Consider one surviving fragment, a quote from Galen mentioning Herophilus' discovery of the duodenum, a section of intestine he named for its length 12 finger widths. This level of precise measurement suggests his manuscripts contained entire chapters on proportional anatomy, possibly even early biomechanics. Later Arab physicians like al-Razi referenced a lost Herophilian technique for treating brain swelling by draining fluid, a procedure echoing modern ventriculostomies. Then there's the matter of his dissections. Unlike his predecessors, Herophilus worked with human bodies, likely supplied by Alexandria's notorious prison system. His drawings of the brain's ventricles and the optic nerves were so accurate, they imply he had methods for preserving tissue long enough to study it. Did his scrolls include embalming recipes or chemical stabilizers? We'll never know. The real tragedy lies in the ripple effect of this loss. Without Herophilus' encyclopedia, medicine regressed. Centuries later, medieval European surgeons would bleed patients based on zodiac charts, unaware that Alexandria's scholars had already mapped venous valves. His work on the reproductive system, particularly his studies of the ovaries and fallopian tubes, might have corrected misconceptions about human embryology that persisted well into the 18th century. Even more tantalizing are hints that he explored localized anesthesia. A Byzantine text mentions hierophilian sleep-inducing pastes applied during cataract surgeries, recipes later attributed to the library's pharmacopoeia. Modern analysis of similar ancient Egyptian compounds suggests they contained opium and mandrake, ingredients still used in anesthesiology today. Perhaps most provocative is the theory that hierophilus manuscripts contained early glimpses of germ theory. A 6th-century monastic scribe, copying a now-lost source, described a passage where the anatomist warned against invisible creatures in putrid wounds, urging surgeons to boil their tools. Was this mere observation, or a proto-scientific understanding of infection? The library's destruction ensured we'd never see his full hypotheses. Every time a modern historian stumbles upon a reference to his Book of Fevers or his Treatise on Wound Purification, we're left with the same agonizing question: how many lives could have been saved if even one of those scrolls had survived? The answer, like so much of Hierophilus' work, remains just out of reach. Long before telescopes pierced the night sky, the Library of Alexandria housed celestial observations so precise they could have rewritten humanity's relationship with the cosmos. Among its most prized possessions were centuries of Babylonian clay tablets and Egyptian star charts, meticulous records tracking planetary movements down to arcminutes of accuracy. These weren't just primitive notations, they were the culmination of generations of temple astronomers who treated the heavens as a divine clockwork. One particular set of tablets, referenced in a surviving commentary by Claudius Ptolemy, detailed Venus' 8-year cycle with an error margin smaller than modern calculations using 17th-century instruments. Imagine how much earlier we might have unraveled the solar system's mechanics if those original observations had survived intact. The Babylonians' grasp of celestial patterns was staggering. Their so-called goal-year texts could predict lunar eclipses decades in advance by recognizing the Saros cycle, a repeating pattern every 18 years, 11 days. The library's version reportedly included corrections for atmospheric refraction, a phenomenon not formally documented again until the 10th century by Arabic astronomers. Even more extraordinary were the Egyptian star clocks, painted on tomb ceilings and transcribed onto scrolls in Alexandria. These weren't just decorative, they functioned as precision calendars aligned with the heliacal rising of Sirius, allowing priests to anticipate Nile floods within a 3-day window. Modern researchers have tried reconstructing these systems from fragments, but critical pieces are missing, like the Dark Star Catalog, a lost ledger said to document the positions of faint, nearly invisible stars used for navigation during moonless nights. What truly separates these records from later European astronomy is their methodology. Unlike the Greeks, who favored geometric models, Babylonian astronomers worked with raw data, thousands of observed planetary positions, logged nightly for over 4 centuries. Their empirical approach bore a striking resemblance to modern data science, identifying patterns through repetition rather than theory. The library's archives likely contained analysis scrolls where scholars like Hipparchus cross-referenced this data with their own, creating hybrid systems that could predict Jupiter's retrograde motion or Mercury's elusive appearances. Fragments of such collaborative work survive in the Antikythera mechanism's gear ratios, a device that might have been merely one of many advanced calculators housed in Alexandria. The greatest tragedy lies in the clues we've found but can't fully decipher. A charred scrap recovered from a library annex mentions the Wanderer's irregularity, possibly referring to Uranus, visible to the naked eye under ideal conditions, and documented as early as 128 BC by Babylonian skywatchers. Another tantalizing reference appears in a Roman historian's offhand remark about Alexandrian star maps showing 7 planets, centuries before Copernicus expanded the count beyond 6. Were these anomalies, errors, or legitimate discoveries suppressed by later dogma? We'll never know for certain, but every time a modern astronomer corrects Kepler's elliptical orbits by a fraction of a degree, they're walking a path first paved by observers whose names and breakthroughs were swallowed by the flames. Among the Library of Alexandria's most ambitious and heartbreakingly lost projects was its unprecedented effort to bridge humanity's linguistic divides. Scholars today refer to it simply as the Translation Initiative, a sprawling mission to collect and translate every known language into Greek, creating what would have been the ancient world's equivalent of the Rosetta Stone, multiplied 1,000-fold. Imagine dedicated scriptoriums where scribes meticulously transcribed African tribal tales into lyrical Greek verse, where Parthian merchants dictated Persian trade laws to multilingual librarians, and where Brahmin scholars from India collaborated on Sanskrit to Egyptian glossaries. This wasn't just administrative work, it was an intellectual moonshot aiming to create a universal linguistic key. The surviving catalog mentions a hall of tongues containing over 50 fully translated literary works, from Phoenician ship logs to Scythian epic poetry, each accompanied by detailed grammatical notes. These weren't mere word lists, they were living bridges between cultures, annotated with cultural context to preserve idioms and humor that literal translations would destroy. What makes the loss particularly devastating is how these texts could have shattered linguistic barriers centuries earlier. Take the Etruscan language, a mystery that still puzzles linguists today. The library reportedly housed bilingual Etruscan Greek inscriptions, possibly even plays or legal documents that could have unlocked this lost civilization's secrets overnight. Instead, scholars spent 2,000 years painstakingly reconstructing fragments of Etruscan from grave markers, a task that might have taken months if the library's translations had survived. The same goes for ancient Nubian, a language with no deciphered script until the 20th century. A single papyrus fragment recovered from a rubbish heap near Alexandria references a Nubian king's speech translated, word for word, with tonal markings, suggesting the librarians recorded not just vocabulary but pronunciation guides for languages that later fell silent. Even more precious were the grammatical treatises, some detailing languages that have since vanished without a trace. Strabo's geography casually mentions a Book of the Garamantes, a Saharan people whose tongue disappeared when their civilization collapsed. The library's version apparently broke down its sentence structure with examples, something modern linguists would trade decades of research to examine. Then there were the language maps, scrolls visually linking linguistic families like Celtic and Gaulish dialects through branching diagrams, an astonishingly modern approach that anticipated comparative linguistics by millennia. The implications ripple far beyond academia. Consider the library's reported translations of Mesopotamian medical texts, which included Sumerian pharmacological terms meticulously matched to Greek equivalents. When the great physician Galen tried reconstructing these remedies centuries later, he lamented how much was lost in the turning of tongues. Without the library's glossaries, critical distinctions between similar-sounding drug names evaporated, possibly leading to medieval medical errors. The same precision was applied to legal translations. One account describes a Carthaginian admiralty code, rendered into Greek with footnotes explaining maritime loan terms unique to Punic culture. These weren't just words swapped between languages, they were entire worldviews preserved in delicate equilibrium. Perhaps most poignant is how the Translation Initiative embodied Alexandria's core philosophy, that knowledge belonged to no single civilization. In meticulously preserving Gaulish war chants, Lydian love poems, and Illyrian fishing songs alongside Greek philosophy, the librarians made an implicit argument that every language held unique wisdom worth saving. When those scrolls burned, we didn't just lose vocabulary lists, we lost the first and, for centuries, the only blueprint for a truly global conversation. Now when AI deciphers linear or reconstructs proto-languages through algorithms, it's chasing a dream Alexandria's scholars had already begun to realize 2,000 years ago. The tragedy isn't just what they accomplished, but how close they came to succeeding. Beneath the library of Alexandria's marble floors and echoing halls, whispers persist of a labyrinth far more enduring than its famed shelves, a network of subterranean vaults where the most precious scrolls might have been hidden from flames and invaders. Ancient sources like the geographer Strabo hint at chambers beneath the Mausoleum, while a cryptic passage in a Byzantine chronicle describes scholars lowering crates of texts into the earth's belly during the siege of 48 BCE. These aren't just rumors. Modern ground-penetrating radar scans near the presumed library site have revealed anomalies, tunnels and cavities matching descriptions of storage rooms lined with waterproof bitumen. Could these be the secret archives, their contents preserved in the dry, stable conditions that have safeguarded Egyptian tombs for millennia? The theory gains traction when examining how Alexandrian librarians protected knowledge. They were master strategists, dispersing duplicates to regional centers like Pergamon and Antioch. If they went to such lengths above ground, why not underground? Archaeologists point to the nearby Serapeum Temple, where excavations uncovered a hidden cellar filled with empty niches, each precisely sized to hold scroll cases. Even more compelling are mortar samples from the area, showing traces of a plant-based preservative used in other ancient libraries to repel insects. But the most tantalizing clue comes from an unexpected source: 19th-century sewer workers. While repairing tunnels under modern Alexandria, they reported stumbling upon a sealed chamber filled with blackened cylinders, likely carbonized papyrus, before the site was hastily reburied. Subsequent scans confirm a large, man-made void beneath that exact location, its entrance deliberately collapsed. Modern searches for these vaults walk a fine line between science and spectacle. In 2014, a Polish-Egyptian team using magnetometry identified a sprawling, grid-like structure beneath the ruins of the Caesareum, a nearby temple long speculated to have library connections. The pattern suggests storage bays, possibly ventilated by copper pipes found in the debris, a system mirroring descriptions of the library's climate control. Meanwhile, a Spanish archaeologist's controversial claim of discovering a single intact scroll in a private collection, reportedly smuggled out of Alexandria's catacombs in the 1920s, has never been verified. The document, if genuine, allegedly discusses underground aquifers, fueling speculation that librarians use the city's natural water tables to regulate humidity. What keeps historians awake at night isn't just the possibility of finding scrolls, it's what those scrolls might contain. A 4th-century bishop's diary references heretical Christian texts stored beneath the library for safekeeping, possibly including alternative gospels that could reshape early church history. Arabic manuscripts mention a map room where copper plates held celestial and terrestrial coordinates, hinting at advanced cartography. Then there's the enduring legend of the Emerald Foundation, a purported cache of Hermetic texts buried so deep even Caliph Omar's troops couldn't reach them during their 7th-century purge of pagan knowledge. The obstacles to confirmation are as layered as the tunnels themselves. Alexandria's water table has risen dramatically since antiquity, flooding potential chambers. Political tensions and urban sprawl limit excavation opportunities, leaving researchers reliant on non-invasive tech, yet every inconclusive scan, every tantalizing but fragmentary reference, adds weight to the central question: if even a fraction of these vaults survived, their contents wouldn't just rewrite history, they'd force us to reimagine the intellectual ambitions of an entire era. The real secret of Alexandria's underground may not be what was lost, but what's still waiting, silent and patient, beneath the feet of a city that's forgotten its own greatest treasure. The bustling port of Alexandria wasn't just a hub for spices and silk, it was a literary hunting ground where librarians wielded an unusual kind of authority. Every ship that docked, whether from Rome's marble quarries or the monsoon-swept coasts of India, faced an extraordinary inspection. Royal decree mandated that guards comb through cargo not for contraband, but for books. Any scroll, codex, or tablet discovered was immediately confiscated, not stolen, but borrowed with the promise of return after scribes meticulously copied every word. This wasn't piracy, it was an intellectual net cast across the known world, designed to reel in knowledge from civilizations that might never otherwise intersect. Consider the implications. A Tamil merchant's vessel arrives with palm leaf manuscripts detailing Ayurvedic surgical techniques. A Norse trader unwraps a bearskin bundle containing rune-carved sagas of Arctic exploration. Even diplomatic envoys weren't exempt. Persian emissaries reportedly surrendered Zoroastrian fire hymns under protest, only to receive gilded Greek translations years later as gifts. The system was ruthlessly efficient. Scholars estimate up to a third of the library's collection originated from these maritime seizures, creating a mosaic of global thought unmatched until the Internet age. The real fascination lies in the outliers, those one-of-a-kind texts that slip through history's cracks everywhere except Alexandria. A first-century ship's log mentions a book of silk from the Han Dynasty, its pages rumored to be actual woven fabric painted with astronomical charts. Another references bamboo scrolls from Borneo describing volcanic eruptions dated using lunar cycles, but the policy had its controversies. Some captains, wise to the practice, began smuggling knowledge, hollowing out amphorae to hide philosophical treatises, or stitching scrolls into sailcloth. The geographer Strabo recounts an Indian scholar's desperate plea when guards seized his life's work on zero-based mathematics, a concept still alien to Mediterranean academics. Did he ever see his original manuscript again? Unlikely. While official records claim copies were returned, the logistics of matching transcripts to far-flung owners in an era without standardized shipping suggest many originals simply stayed. What treasures might this system have captured? A passing mention in a Byzantine chronicle alludes to Scythian horse songs, transcribed phonetically with Greek annotations, a lost oral epic now known only by its borrowed title. Even more intriguing are accounts of Celtic Druidic calendars, their complex lunar-solar calculations later echoed in the library's own astronomical texts. The real tragedy is how thoroughly the policy's spoils were erased. When the library burned, it didn't just destroy Greek philosophy, it consumed the only surviving copies of works from cultures whose own archives had crumbled centuries earlier. Those copied scrolls were lifelines to entire intellectual traditions, and their absence leaves us forever wondering how much richer our understanding of the ancient world might have been. Perhaps the most poignant loss was a collection reportedly taken from a shipwrecked Chinese junk, waterlogged scrolls on silk, painstakingly dried and restored, containing what librarians catalogued as maps of stars unseen in our skies. Were these precise charts of the southern celestial hemisphere, recorded by mariners who'd rounded the Cape of Good Hope long before the Common Era? Or perhaps observations from equatorial latitudes, documenting constellations the Greeks had no names for? We'll never know, but the very existence of such entries proves Alexandria's librarians understood a fundamental truth: knowledge wasn't just what you inherited, it was what you had the courage to take from the tides. Amid the charred remnants of the Library of Alexandria, one loss stands out as particularly haunting: the original blueprints of Hero of Alexandria's mechanical wonders, including designs that historians now believe may have been the world's first functional steam engines. Hero's surviving manuscript Pneumatica describes a whimsical device called an eolipile, a hollow sphere fitted with angled nozzles that spun rapidly when heated, harnessing steam pressure to create motion. But here's what most accounts overlook: the library likely housed far more advanced iterations of this technology, drafts and models that push steam power beyond mere curiosity into genuine utility. A passing mention in a Byzantine engineering text references Hero's greater engine, a lost design capable of lifting water without the labor of beasts. Could this have been a steam-driven pump, a practical application that predated Thomas Newcomen's 18th-century inventions by nearly 2 millennia? The implications are staggering. Hero wasn't working in isolation. He built upon knowledge from the library's archives, where Egyptian irrigation techniques met Greek mechanics. Fragments of correspondence between Hero and his contemporaries suggest they understood the scalability of steam. One letter describes a demonstration where a scaled-up Aeolipile powered a miniature theater's automated props, leading scholars to speculate the library's workshops might have housed larger prototypes. Even more compelling are accounts from Roman bath architects, who credited Alexandrian engineers with designing pressurized heating systems driven by vapors. While no intact schematics survive, the technical language in these descriptions mirrors principles later used in industrial steam engines. What truly sparks debate is how close the ancient world came to an industrial leap. Unlike the Aeolipile, which was dismissed as a toy, Hero's lost designs reportedly included valves and pistons, key components for converting steam into sustained work. A 10th-century Arabic manuscript alludes to a fire-wheel device from Alexandria, possibly a primitive turbine, while a Roman mining report mentions automatic pumps in Iberian silver mines that could have been steam-assisted. The library's destruction didn't just erase these machines, it shattered an intellectual lineage. Hero's successors lacked access to the cumulative engineering knowledge that might have refined these prototypes into practical tools, forcing humanity to rediscover steam power from scratch centuries later. Modern engineers have tried reconstructing Hero's potential designs with mixed results. In 2003, a team from the University of Minnesota built an Aeolipile connected to a piston system based on descriptions from secondary sources. The result? A crude but functional engine capable of repetitive motion, proof that the basic principles were within Hero's reach. Yet without the library's blueprints, we'll never know how far he or his colleagues might have progressed. The real tragedy isn't just the lost technology, it's the cultural mindset that vanished with it. Alexandria scholars saw no divide between theory and application, marrying abstract mathematics to workshops where ideas were forged into brass and wood. That spirit of integration, the willingness to tinker, scale, and iterate, might have been the true spark the Industrial Revolution needed. Instead, the library's flames left behind only whispers of what could have been, and a lingering question: how different would our world look if steam had powered antiquity's ambitions instead of its toys? Plato's account of Atlantis wasn't just a philosophical allegory, it was a fragment. A footnote in his dialogues hints at something far grander, that the story he told was a condensed version of Egyptian records, scrolls that allegedly filled entire shelves in the Library of Alexandria. According to his own writings, Plato learned of Atlantis from Solon, who in turn heard it from priests at the Temple of Neith in Sais. These priests claimed their ancestors had documented the island kingdom's rise and fall in meticulous detail. So what secrets might those original Egyptian texts have held? The library's copies, now lost, could have contained everything from Atlantean engineering schematics to the full timeline of its war with ancient Athens, details Plato, summarized in just a few pages. Consider the tantalizing gaps in the surviving story. Plato describes Atlantis as a technologically advanced civilization with concentric canals, geothermal energy, and orichalcum, a mysterious metal gleaming like fire. But he never explains how they built these marvels. The library's Egyptian sources might have held answers. A Byzantine chronicler, John Malalas, references a now-lost Alexandrian text that described Atlantean architects using liquid stone poured into molds, a possible allusion to early concrete or even vitrified rock. Even more intriguing are hints that the library housed maritime charts marking Atlantis's exact coordinates. A 9th-century Arab historian, Mesudi, wrote of a copper map in Alexandria showing lands beyond the Pillars of Hercules, including a large island labeled Poseidon's Dominion. If true, this could have been the key to locating the fabled continent's ruins. Then there's the matter of Atlantis's downfall. Plato's version blames divine punishment for the island's sinking, but earlier accounts might have offered a scientific explanation. The library's geographers were known to study seismic activity and volcanic eruptions. Could their Atlantean records have described a cataclysmic earthquake or a massive tsunami triggered by Thura's eruption in 1600 BCE? A fragmentary Greek poem discovered in the 19th century references an Alexandrian scroll called The Drowning, which allegedly recounted Atlantis's collapse hour by hour, complete with eyewitness accounts of waves as tall as mountains and the earth swallowing temples whole. Without the original, we're left guessing whether this was poetry or reportage. The greatest loss, however, may be cultural. Plato focused on Atlantis's conflict with Athens, but Egyptian chronologies likely painted a fuller picture of its society. A 2nd century CE Roman scholar, Aelian, claimed the library possessed a scroll titled Customs of the Atlanteans, detailing everything from their legal system to their musical instruments. One passage he paraphrased described a harp-like device played using the vibrations of the sea, possibly an early hydrophone. Another mentioned a council of rulers who governed via consensus, a radical contrast to Plato's emphasis on Atlantean tyranny. These nuances suggest the library's version of Atlantis wasn't just a cautionary tale, but a complex civilization worthy of study in its own right. Perhaps most provocative is the possibility that these texts didn't view Atlantis as unique. A papyrus scrap recovered from an Alexandria dump site references the 7 island kingdoms, with Atlantis listed as merely the largest. Were there other advanced maritime cultures lost to time? The library's geographers seem to think so. Strabo recorded their belief that the outer ocean held multiple landmasses, some possibly inhabited. If the full Atlantean archives had survived, we might be discussing not a lone mythical city, but an entire network of prehistoric civilizations, their inventions, their conflicts, their legacy waiting to reshape our understanding of human history. Instead, all we have are echoes, fragments of fragments, leaving us to wonder how much of our own past sank with those vanished scrolls. Euclid's Elements is often hailed as the foundation of geometry, a masterpiece that shaped mathematical thought for over 2 millennia. But what if the version we know today is just a shadow of its former self? Ancient scholars like Proclus and Pappus referenced additional volumes of Euclid's work, books that vanished when the Library of Alexandria burned. These lost sections weren't mere appendices. They reportedly contained advanced theories that push beyond the familiar axioms and postulates we've studied for centuries. Imagine geometries of higher dimensions, or perhaps early explorations of infinity concepts that wouldn't resurface in mainstream mathematics until the 19th century. One tantalizing clue comes from a 9th century Arabic manuscript quoting an Alexandrian mathematician's lecture on Euclid's 8th book, a text dedicated to the harmony of shapes in motion. This wasn't static geometry. It described curves and surfaces interacting dynamically, like the paths of planets or the tension in a suspended chain. Some historians believe this could have been an early study of catenaries or even projective geometry, ideas that wouldn't be formalized until Bernoulli and Desargues 1,000 years later. Even more intriguing are fragments from a Byzantine encyclopedia mentioning Euclid's work on slanting numbers, a cryptic phrase that might refer to oblique coordinate systems predating Cartesian geometry by centuries. Then there's the mystery of Euclid's rumored optics. A separate treatise once housed in the library. While a shortened version survives, the original was said to include elaborate diagrams of light bending through lenses, complete with mathematical proofs. A Roman engineer's notebook found in Pompeii references these diagrams. describing how Alexandrian opticians used them to design precision lenses for lighthouses and telescopes. If true, Euclid may have laid the groundwork for geometric optics long before Alhazen's breakthroughs in the Islamic Golden Age, but the most provocative gaps lie in the elements itself. Modern editions contain 13 books, yet an inventory list from the Serapeum Temple, one of Alexandria's satellite libraries, mentions 15. The missing 2 were labeled on the construction of the universe and divisions beyond the line, titles that suggest cosmological and fractal mathematics. A scrap of commentary by the philosopher Simplicius hints that the latter explored dividing shapes into infinitely repeating patterns, a concept eerily similar to modern fractal theory. Meanwhile, construction of the universe reportedly linked geometric forms to planetary orbits, anticipating Kepler's model of nested polyhedrons by nearly 2,000 years. What makes these losses so cutting is how they distort our view of ancient science. Euclid wasn't just a codifier of basic principles, he may have been probing the very frontiers of mathematical thought. His missing volumes could have shaved centuries off humanity's intellectual journey, giving Renaissance scholars a head start on non-Euclidean geometries or calculus. Instead, we're left with echoes, a footnote here, a paraphrased lemma there, whispers of a mathematical genius whose full vision burned before it could illuminate the ages. Towering over the turbulent waters of Alexandria's harbor, the pharaoh's lighthouse didn't just guide ships, it defied the limits of ancient engineering. For over 1,600 years, it stood as the tallest man-made structure on Earth, except for the Great Pyramid, a marvel of mortar and marble that weathered earthquakes and storms. Yet here's the twist: the secrets behind its resilience were meticulously recorded in scrolls stored in the library of Alexandria, and when those parchments burned, they took with them innovations that modern architects still struggle to reverse engineer. The lighthouse's blueprints weren't just construction notes, they were masterclasses in applied physics, detailing everything from the precise angle of its mirror to the hidden dampeners that stabilized it against seismic shocks. Take its legendary mirror, for instance. Ancient texts describe a polished bronze disc so precisely curved it could focus sunlight into a beam visible 35 miles out to sea, a feat that would require optical precision thought impossible before the Renaissance. But without the library's schematics, we don't know how they achieved such flawless parabolic geometry. Was it cast in a single piece or assembled from smaller panels? A 10th-century Arab traveler's account mentions a recipe for reflective metal in the library's archives, a formula blending copper, tin, and an unknown polishing agent that resisted tarnishing in salt air. Modern attempts to replicate this alloy have fallen short, producing mirrors that cloud within months, not centuries. Then there's the mystery of the lighthouse's foundation. Roman engineers marveled at how it stood firm on shifting silt, a problem that still plagues coastal construction today. Recent sonar scans of the harbor floor reveal a submerged network of wooden pilings, but the library's scrolls reportedly contain diagrams showing how these were interlaced with lead-filled grooves to absorb vibrations. Even more ingenious was the mortar binding its limestone blocks, a material so durable, medieval chroniclers claimed it grew harder with time. Chemical analysis of surviving fragments detected traces of volcanic ash imported from Italy, suggesting the librarians may have housed manuals on pozzolanic concrete, a technology Rome later perfected but perhaps didn't originate. The most tantalizing gap in our knowledge is the lighthouse's internal mechanics. A Byzantine manuscript references a lost Alexandrian text describing a counterweighted elevator system used to haul fuel to the summit, powered by a treadmill operated by oxen. This wasn't just primitive machinery, it was an early example of continuous vertical transport, a concept not fully realized again until industrial age factories. Other fragments hint at a hydraulic clock installed in the base, its gears synchronized to tides, proving the lighthouse was as much a scientific instrument as a navigational aid. What truly staggers modern researchers is how these innovations vanished so completely. When an earthquake finally toppled the pharaohs in the 14th century, its rubble became a quarry for fortresses, scattering its secrets stone by stone. Today, every time engineers study earthquake-resistant skyscrapers or coastal reinforcement, they're grappling with problems the Alexandrians had already solved and recorded in scrolls we'll never read. The lighthouse's ghost lingers not just in its absent silhouette on the skyline, but in the whispers of knowledge that could have rewritten the history of engineering. Not every scroll in the Library of Alexandria was lost to random flames. Some may have vanished by deliberate design. Among its most explosive holdings were the so-called forbidden histories, unvarnished accounts that challenge the official narratives of kings and conquerors. Take the rumored diaries of Alexander's generals, eyewitness chronicles deemed so politically dangerous that Ptolemy II allegedly ordered them locked away. Unlike the sanitized versions of Alexander's campaigns taught in royal academies, these raw field journals reportedly depicted the conqueror's moments of cruelty and indecision, his massacre at Thebes, his drunken murder of Cleitus, even his private doubts about divinity. One surviving fragment from a Roman historian quotes a passage where General Ptolemy himself wrote, "We followed not a god, but a man who bled like one and raged like many." The library's copies, if they existed, would have been invaluable to historians and deeply threatening to the Ptolemaic dynasty that claimed descent from Alexander's divine legacy. Equally contentious were the suppressed religious texts. The library's archives supposedly housed alternative scriptures from early Judaism and Christianity, including a dissenting history of Moses' Exodus that contradicted the Torah. A 3rd-century bishop's letter mentions a scroll titled The Crown and the Staff, which portrayed Aaron not as Moses' loyal brother, but as a rival who staged the golden calf incident to undermine him. Then there were the heretical Christian Gospels accounts of Jesus' teachings, deemed too radical for inclusion in the New Testament. A charred scrap discovered in an Oxyrhynchus trash heap references a lost Alexandrian manuscript called the Dialogue of the Savior, where Jesus speaks in riddles about the light within all things, a philosophy closer to Gnostic mysticism than Orthodox doctrine. These weren't just theological differences, they were competing visions of sacred history, preserved in Alexandria precisely because its librarians prized intellectual diversity. Perhaps most explosive of all were the diplomatic archives, uncensored records of treaties broken, bribes paid, and rebellions staged with royal approval. A Byzantine chronicler describes a now-lost Book of Kings that listed every Ptolemaic ruler's secret police budget alongside casualty figures from peasant revolts. Another account mentions scrolls detailing Rome's early interference in Egyptian affairs, including payments to assassinate anti-Roman viziers. These weren't merely embarrassing, they were geopolitical dynamite. When Julius Caesar set fire to the harbor in 48 BCE, was it truly an accident, or a convenient way to erase evidence of his predecessor's manipulations? The question lingers because the library's greatest taboo wasn't ignorance, it was truth too dangerous to preserve. The real tragedy is how thoroughly the censors succeeded. Unlike the slow decay of time or the chaos of war, deliberate destruction leaves no fragments to reconstruct. We're left with ghost imprints, a historian's footnote here, a playwright's allusion there hinting at narratives that once dared to contradict the powerful. Every vanished scroll represents a road not taken, a version of history that might have reshaped how we understand power, faith, and human nature itself. What makes these losses different from the rest is their intentionality. Fire can be random, but silence rarely is. Aristotle's influence stretches like an unbroken thread through the tapestry of Western thought, yet what we have today is just a frayed remnant of his genius. The Library of Alexandria didn't just house copies of his surviving works, it safeguarded something far more intimate, his personal library, and the original lecture notes he used while teaching at the Lyceum. These weren't the polished treatises that survived the centuries, but the raw, unfiltered versions annotated with marginal debates, revisions, and perhaps even ideas he later abandoned. Imagine the revelations hidden in those lost scrolls. The Aristotle we know is a sculptor's finished marble, but the library's collection held the chisel marks and rough drafts that could show us how his mind actually worked. Consider the staggering scale of what's missing. Ancient catalogs suggest the library possessed over 200 Aristotelian texts, nearly 5 times the number that survived. Some were complete works referenced by later scholars but now lost entirely, like on Ideas, his critical response to Plato's theory of forms, or Progression of Animals, which reportedly detailed biomechanics beyond anything in De Anima. Even more tantalizing are the lecture notes on topics Aristotle never formally published. A first-century commentator, Andronicus of Rhodes, describes a volume called Physical Problems, where Aristotle grappled with paradoxes like why pebbles smoothed by waves become spherical, a question that wouldn't be fully answered until the physics of erosion was understood millennia later. These weren't just academic exercises, they were windows into the scientific method as it was being invented. The gaps in his surviving works only deepen the mystery. Take ethics. Nicomachean ethics dominates modern discussions, but the library held at least 2 other major treatises, Eudemian Ethics and the lost Magna Moralio, which may have offered radically different frameworks. A fragment from the latter, quoted by Cicero, suggests Aristotle explored the idea of communal virtue, a concept closer to modern social contract theory than his usual focus on individual character. Then there's politics. His Constitution of Athens survived by sheer luck, but the library reportedly housed similar studies for over 150 other city-states, an ancient comparative government archive that could have reshaped our understanding of Greek democracy. But the most painful loss might be his scientific writings. The library's inventory lists scrolls like Measurement of the Earth, where Aristotle supposedly calculated the planet's circumference decades before Eratosthenes, and Mechanical Problems, a forerunner to engineering physics. Byzantine scholars mention his diagrams of compound pulleys and levers, complete with mathematical notation that anticipated Archimedes. Even more intriguing are hints that he'd begun systematizing biology beyond history of animals. A 9th-century Arabic text references an Alexandrian manuscript titled The Causes of Life, where Aristotle allegedly speculated about microscopic organisms, a theory impossible to confirm without lenses, yet eerily prescient. Without these originals, we're left with a truncated version of his legacy, like studying Shakespeare knowing half his plays burned. The real tragedy lies in how much richer philosophy and science could have been. Aristotle's extant works often feel frustratingly dense because we're missing the connective tissue, the debates with students, the dead-end hypotheses, the living context that turned abstract principles into tools for understanding the world. The library's copies weren't just texts, they were time capsules from the birth of systematic thought. Every modern ethics seminar that wrestles with his virtue theory, every physicist tracing the roots of causality, is working with half the puzzle. And that's the cruelest twist of Alexandria's flames. They didn't just erase words, they erased the very process of how one of humanity's greatest minds learned to think. Hidden beneath the towering shelves of the Library of Alexandria lay scrolls that held the key to Ptolemaic Egypt's naval supremacy manual, so detailed, they turned the Mediterranean into a chessboard where every wave was a calculated move. These weren't just dry treatises on shipbuilding, they were the ancient world's equivalent of classified defense documents, compiling centuries of maritime innovation into strategies that kept rival fleets at bay. Imagine pages crammed with schematics for warships wider and faster than anything Rome or Carthage could muster, or battle formations that used wind patterns as tactical weapons. The most coveted of all was the Admiral's Codex, a scroll rumored to contain the Navy's secret playbook diagrams of the Scorpion Formation, where ships coiled like serpents to trap enemies, or the solar flare, a maneuver using reflected sunlight to blind opposing crews before ramming. What set these manuals apart was their fusion of science and brutality. Surviving accounts describe hull designs reinforced with diagonal timber braces, a technique that wouldn't be rediscovered until Viking longships, and sails woven from linen treated with alum to resist flame. But the real game-changer was their arsenal. A 10th-century Arab historian, al-Masudi, references a lost Alexandrian text detailing liquid fire, a substance sprayed through bronze tubes to ignite enemy decks. While later Byzantine Greek fire is more famous, the Ptolemies may have pioneered its prototype centuries earlier. Chemical analysis of residue on recovered ship remnants near Alexandria reveals traces of naphtha and quicklime, suggesting the library's chemists had perfected pyrotechnic warfare long before medieval Byzantium. The manuals didn't stop at weapons. They dissected the psychology of naval combat, advising captains to exploit superstitions, like deploying smoke screens dyed blood red to unsettle enemies, or timing attacks during lunar eclipses when crews were likeliest to panic. One fragmented parchment describes a psychological warfare tactic called the silence drill, where oarsmen rowed in perfect, soundless unison under cover of darkness, making ships appear as ghostly apparitions before striking. Even maintenance was elevated to an art form. A Greek merchant's letter mentions a scroll titled The Ship's Breath, which taught crews to listen for specific creaks in hull planks as early warnings of structural failure, a practice modern navies would later formalize as acoustic monitoring. The true tragedy of their loss isn't just the vanished tactics, it's the lost understanding of ancient maritime ecosystems. These manuals reportedly included tidal charts predicting currents down to the hour, fishing calendars to resupply fleets without docking, and even treatments for barnacle infestations using copper sheathing, a method Britain patented in the 18th century. When the library burned, it didn't just erase knowledge, it sank an entire philosophy of naval dominance, forcing future generations to relearn through trial and error what Alexandria's admirals had already mastered. Today, as historians pore over barnacle-encrusted wrecks or debate the feasibility of ancient flamethrowers, they're piecing together shadows of a system that once ruled the waves with terrifying precision. The manual's ghost lingers in every modern naval strategy session, a reminder that the greatest weapon isn't fire or steel, it's the knowledge of how to use them. We think we know Homer's epics, the rage of Achilles, the cunning of Odysseus, but what if the versions passed down to us are just shadows of their original grandeur? The Library of Alexandria reportedly housed manuscripts of the Iliad and Odyssey so ancient they predated the standardized texts by centuries, containing entire verses, even whole chapters, that vanished from later editions. These weren't minor variations, they were alternate tellings, richer in detail and sometimes radically different in plot. Imagine an Iliad where Patroclus wasn't just Achilles' friend, but his lover, their relationship painted with the same emotional intensity as the heroes' bonds in later Greek lyric poetry. Or an Odyssey that included a lost adventure in the frozen north, where Odysseus battled giants not in sun-drenched Sicily, but beneath the eerie glow of the aurora borealis. The evidence for these alternate versions isn't just speculative. Ancient scholars like Zenodotus, the first head librarian at Alexandria, wrote detailed commentaries comparing older manuscripts to the newer Athenian editions. His notes, preserved in fragments, mention a wild odyssey that included a stop in a land of shape-shifting wolves, a scene later deemed too fantastical and cut. Even more tantalizing are references to a Cyprian Iliad, a prequel of sorts that narrated the entire Trojan War, from its divine origins to the moment Homer's version begins. A single charred scrap from Oxyhinch's quotes a line describing Aphrodite weaving a shroud of stars to hide Paris and Helen's escape, an image so vivid, it's startling to realize it once existed, then was erased. Why did these differences matter? Because Homer wasn't just a poet, he was a cultural touchstone. The epics were performed at festivals, quoted in legal disputes, even used to teach morality. Alter a single scene, and you could shift how generations understood heroism, loyalty, or the gods' whims. Take the controversial catalogue of ships in the Iliad, the long list of Greek forces. Later editors condensed it, but Alexandria's older scrolls reportedly included annotations linking each city to contemporary trade routes and alliances, turning a dry inventory into a geopolitical masterclass. Other missing passages blurred the line between history and myth. One 2nd-century geographer cites a now-lost Homeric description of the Nile source, complete with landmarks matching actual African geography. Was this poetic license, or evidence that Bronze Age Greeks knew more about the continent than we've credited? The greatest loss, however, might be the performative context. Homer's works were originally oral, changing subtly with each recitation. The library's oldest texts likely preserved these fluid variations, margin notes, recording how a bard in Rhodes emphasized Hector's grief differently than one in Thebes. A Byzantine scholar's scrapbook mentions a scroll titled Homer's Many Voices, which analyzed dialect choices across regions, proving the epics were never meant to be static. Without these records, we've fossilized Homer into a single, correct version, forgetting that for centuries, his verses breathed and evolved like living things. The tragedy isn't just the vanished lines, it's how their absence has flattened our understanding of ancient storytelling. Modern readers encounter the Iliad and Odyssey as monoliths, unaware they're holding fragments of fragments, frozen echoes of a tradition once as vast and turbulent as the wine-dark sea itself. Every time scholars debate whether a newly discovered papyrus fragment is authentic, they're grappling with a deeper question: can we ever recover the true Homer, or has his voice been forever distilled into the version that survived, rather than the ones that thrived? The Egyptian Book of the Dead as we know it is already a mesmerizing guide to the afterlife, a collection of spells and rituals meant to steer souls through the perilous journey of the Jewat. But hidden within the library of Alexandria's archives was something far more extraordinary: additional chapters, whole sections of esoteric knowledge that never made it into modern translations. These weren't just extra prayers or variations on existing incantations, they were entirely new layers of the afterlife's roadmap, spells so potent and strange that even Egyptologists can only guess at their purpose from scattered references in temple carvings and royal tombs. Consider the implications. The standard Book of the Dead contains around 200 spells, each meticulously crafted to help the deceased navigate challenges like demonic gatekeepers or fiery lakes. But a 1st century BC inventory list from Alexandria's Serapeum mentions a scroll titled The Utterances of Thoth, boasting over 300 chapters, many labeled as sealed, meaning they were restricted to high priests and pharaohs alone. One surviving fragment, quoted by a Roman historian, describes a spell called the Opening of the Celestial Granary, which allegedly allowed souls to access not just the afterlife, but the very moment of creation itself. Another references a ritual where the deceased could wear the face of any god, suggesting shape-shifting abilities beyond the known texts. The most haunting gap in our knowledge revolves around the so-called shadow spells. While traditional chapters focus on light and rebirth, Alexandrian scholars like Clement wrote of darker, counterbalanced rites formulas to repel the devourers of silence, or navigate a hidden underworld river called the Ementet, whose waters were said to erase memories. A Coptic manuscript from the 4th century mentions a lost Alexandrian scroll detailing how to commune with the unseen ancestors, spirits who existed outside the cycle of judgment in Osiris's hall. Were these marginal notes, or entire sections of the afterlife manual that later scribes deemed too dangerous to preserve? Modern archaeology offers tantalizing clues. In 2018, Scans of Tutankhamun's tomb revealed hidden chambers with inscriptions matching descriptions from these lost chapters, including a bizarre diagram of concentric circles labeled "The Paths of the Forgotten." Even more compelling are the Dendera temple's crypts, where carvings depict priests consulting scrolls that don't resemble any known version of the Book of the Dead. One relief shows a spell being read backward, its hieroglyphs glowing as if animated, a practice never mentioned in surviving texts. The real tragedy is how thoroughly these omissions distort our understanding of Egyptian spirituality. The Book of the Dead wasn't a static text, it evolved over centuries, absorbing regional variations and secret doctrines. Alexandria's copies likely held the most complete version ever compiled, a master manuscript that wove together every strand of afterlife belief from Thebes to Memphis. Without it, we're left with a patchwork, like trying to reconstruct a symphony from a handful of scattered notes. Every time a new tomb discovery hints at an unfamiliar ritual or an unexplained mural, we're glimpsing fragments of the library's vanished wisdom, spells that once held the power to unlock the deepest mysteries of existence, now silenced forever. Of all the mysteries surrounding the Library of Alexandria's destruction, none is more haunting than the possibility that its final moments were documented by someone who witnessed them, a last, desperate scroll chronicling the chaos as flames consumed the world's greatest repository of knowledge. Imagine a librarian, perhaps hunched in a shadowy corner of the burning complex, hastily scratching notes onto papyrus as smoke curled through the halls. Did they record the crackle of burning parchment, the shouts of scholars trying to salvage armfuls of scrolls, or the identities of those who stood by as centuries of wisdom turned to ash? While no such first-hand account has ever been recovered, fragments from later historians hint that someone may have tried. One tantalizing clue comes from an unlikely source, a 7th century Coptic monk's diary discovered in a Cairo monastery. Buried between prayers was a reference to a testimony of flames, a lost manuscript supposedly smuggled out of Alexandria by a survivor. According to the monk, this scroll described librarians rolling precious texts into copper tubes and lowering them into cisterns, while others formed human chains to pass scrolls to waiting boats in the harbor. Even more intriguing was the claim that the account named the true instigator of the fire, contradicting the popular blame placed on Julius Caesar's troops. The diary's phrasing suggests the writer accused a faction of extremist philosophers who viewed the library's secular knowledge as a threat to their rigid doctrines, a theory that aligns with known ideological tensions in 1st century BC Alexandria. But the most heartbreaking details emerge from scattered references in Byzantine chronicles. A historian named John Malalas, writing in the 6th century, cited an eyewitness who saw scholars weeping as they fed scrolls to the flames rather than let them fall into profane hands. This implies a horrifying scenario, that some librarians chose controlled destruction over surrender, burning select works themselves to keep them from being misused or censored. Other accounts mention a last-minute effort to save the library's catalog, the Pinaxe, with teams of scribes racing to transcribe its contents onto smaller, portable tablets. A charred wooden disc found near the ancient harbor in 2014 bore crude Greek letters listing maritime scrolls, fueling speculation that it was part of this desperate preservation attempt. The question of responsibility remains hotly debated. While Caesar's siege in 48 BCE is the most famous culprit, Arabic historians like al-Masudi pointed to later destruction under Christian emperors targeting pagan texts, and Caliph Omar's alleged order to burn redundant books in the 7th century. A fragmentary letter attributed to Hypatia's student Ors claims the Serapeum, the library's annex, was secretly emptied before Christian mobs razed it, its collections dispersed to private villas and underground reading circles. If true, this would mean the library's final hours weren't a single catastrophe, but a slow unraveling across centuries, with each wave of violence erasing another layer of its legacy. What makes these fragments so compelling is the humanity they reveal, These weren't just buildings burning, they were generations of curiosity and painstaking labor vanishing in real time. A single sentence from the monk's diary lingers like a ghost. They say the smoke rising that day carried the words of 1,000 nations, their ink becoming the sky. Whether any scrolls survive to tell the full story may never be known, but the absence itself speaks volumes, a silence where there should have been voices, a gap in history where the record keepers themselves became the lost. Deep in the vaulted halls of remote monasteries and the crumbling ruins of desert fortresses, a quiet revolution is unfolding, one that might yet salvage fragments of the Library of Alexandria from the ashes of history. Modern archaeologists and historians aren't just hunting for intact scrolls, they're piecing together a literary jigsaw puzzle from the most unlikely places. Take the phenomenon of palimpsest, parchments scrubbed clean of their original text to make way for medieval prayers or legal documents. Beneath those later layers, erased but not entirely vanished, lie the ghostly traces of lost classical works. In the library of St. Catherine's Monastery at the foot of Mount Sinai, a team using multispectral imaging, a technology that captures light wavelengths invisible to the naked eye, recently uncovered mathematical theorems from Archimedes lurking beneath a 13th-century hymn book. The original text, erased by a monk desperate for reusable parchment, turned out to be a previously unknown treatise on combinatorics, a branch of mathematics not formally explored again until the Renaissance. But the hunt extends far beyond erased texts. In the caves of Qumran, where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found, researchers are now deploying AI to analyze pottery shards and fragments too small for the human eye to decipher. These ostraca, once dismissed as rubble, are now revealing shipping manifests, poetry, and even snippets of what might be early Greek translations of Egyptian medical texts, hinting at a clandestine network of knowledge exchange that survived Alexandria's fall. Meanwhile, in the basement of the Vatican Library, infrared scanners are probing bindings of medieval books, where strips of ancient papyrus were repurposed as spine reinforcements. One such strip, painstakingly reassembled in 2019, turned out to be a passage from Hesiod's Catalogue of Women, a genealogical epic once thought lost forever. The real game-changer, though, is the marriage of old and new technologies. X-ray fluorescence, originally developed for analyzing industrial materials, can now detect the faintest metallic traces in ink, even when the parchment itself has decayed. At Oxford's Bodleian Library, this technique revealed a charred scrap from Herculaneum's Villa of the Papyri to contain lines from a lost Sophocles play carbonized by Vesuvius's eruption, yet miraculously legible at the atomic level. Even more promising is the use of particle accelerators to virtually unroll scrolls too fragile to touch. The Diamond Light Source synchrotron in the UK has successfully image-sealed scrolls from Pompeii, mapping their internal structure without physical intervention, like a literary MRI. But the most poignant discoveries often come from the margins. A scholar in Cairo recently noticed faint annotations in the back of a Coptic Psalter notations that matched a quote from Hypatia's student Synesius about the library's final days. Elsewhere, a fragment of papyrus used to wrap a mummy's foot in the Louvre's storage revealed a Greek merchant's letter mentioning a great fire that devoured the books of the wise. These aren't just artifacts, they're breadcrumbs leading us back to the intellectual feast that was Alexandria. The challenge now isn't just finding these fragments, it's learning to read them anew. Machine learning algorithms trained on known texts can predict missing words with eerie accuracy, reconstructing damaged passages like a linguistic autocomplete. In Leipzig, a team fed an AI every surviving line of Euclid, then tasked it with filling gaps in a fire-damaged geometry scroll. The result, a previously unknown proof for doubling the cube, hiding in plain sight for centuries. What keeps these efforts alive is the tantalizing possibility that the library's greatest treasures might still be out there, not as mythical hoards in hidden chambers, but as overlooked scribbles on recycled parchment, waiting for the right combination of technology and patience to whisper their secrets once more. Every time a monk's prayer fades under a scanner's glow, giving way to Archimedes' equations or Sappho's poetry, it's proof that the past isn't truly gone, just buried, patiently biding its time. Could the greatest repository of ancient knowledge ever be resurrected in the digital age? In the past 2 decades, teams of scholars and computer scientists have launched ambitious projects to virtually rebuild the Library of Alexandria, not with papyrus and ink, but through algorithms and painstaking textual detective work. The most prominent of these is the Living Alexandria Initiative, a collaboration between universities from Athens to Cairo that scours surviving Greek, Arabic, and Latin texts for fragments of lost works. Their method relies on a simple but powerful insight. When ancient authors quoted or criticized each other, they inadvertently preserved shards of the library's holdings. Imagine combing through a 12th century commentary on Aristotle for a single paraphrased sentence from Herophilus' missing medical treatise, or identifying Euclid's lost diagrams hidden in the margins of a medieval monk's geometry notebook. These digital archaeologists have already reconstructed partial texts of over 30 lost works, from botanical studies to Babylonian legal codes, by stitching together such scattered references, like reassembling a shattered mosaic one tile at a time. Yet the challenges are as vast as the ambitions. Take the case of Chrysippus, the Stoic philosopher whose prolific writings once filled 750 scrolls in Alexandria. Though revered in antiquity, only fragments of his work survive, mostly as quotes in opponents' rebuttals. This creates a distortion effect where we know Chrysippus primarily through the lens of those who disagreed with him. It's akin to reconstructing Shakespeare's plays using only parodies written by his critics. Even when citations are accurate, they're often condensed or stripped of context. A passing mention of Archimedes' theory of buoyancy in a Roman engineer's notebook might preserve the core idea, but not the elegant mathematical proofs that made it revolutionary. Digital reconstructions can approximate the what of ancient knowledge, but frequently miss the why, the intellectual leaps and creative processes that made these works transformative. Technology offers tantalizing workarounds. Machine learning models trained on surviving classical texts can now predict with uncanny accuracy how an author like Hipparchus might have phrased an astronomical observation, or what terminology Aristotle would have used in his lost dialogue on ideas. At Stanford's Digital Humanities Lab, researchers fed an AI every known extant Greek scientific manuscript, then tasked it with generating plausible reconstructions of Eratosthenes' Lost Geographica. The result wasn't a perfect replica, but a statistically probable approximation, one that included coastal measurements startlingly close to modern satellite data. Similarly, 3D modeling has breathed life into the library's legendary mechanical wonders. By cross-referencing Hero of Alexandria's surviving works with medieval Arabic technical manuals, a team in Berlin digitally rebuilt his hypothetical steam-powered organ, proving its feasibility centuries after the original blueprints burned. But the limitations cut deep. For all our computational power, some silences remain unbroken. Poetry and drama, reliant on aesthetic brilliance rather than logical structures, defy algorithmic reconstruction. We'll likely never recover Sappho's exquisite verses or the tragic power of Sophocles' lost plays through citation traces alone. Even in scientific domains, the human element resists replication. The library's scrolls weren't just information, they were conversations, marginal debates between scholars, annotations refining theories across generations, even doodles in the margins that revealed how ideas sparked. A single palimpsest recently discovered beneath a Syrian monastery's floorboards held 7 layers of texts, each scraping away the past while preserving ghostly impressions. That palimpsest is the perfect metaphor for these reconstruction efforts. We glimpse patterns in the shadows, but the vibrant colors of original thought have faded beyond recovery. Perhaps the most poignant lesson lies in what these projects reveal about knowledge itself. The library wasn't just a storage facility, it was a living network where Egyptian medicine informed Greek anatomy, where Babylonian astronomy fertilized Indian mathematics. Modern attempts to rebuild it digitally have inadvertently recreated that connectivity, linking researchers from Tokyo to Texas in collaborative platforms that, in spirit, mirror Alexandria's cosmopolitan ethos. Yet for all our tools, we're still left with a profound truth: some fires don't just destroy objects, they erase ways of thinking, entire frameworks for understanding the world that can't be pieced back together through citations alone. The library's true ghost isn't the words we've lost, but the conversations between them that once made the ancient world glow with intellectual light. The burning of the Library of Alexandria wasn't just the loss of a building, it was the shattering of humanity's collective memory, a rupture in the timeline of knowledge so profound that we're still grappling with its aftershocks 2,000 years later. Think of it this way: every scientific revolution, every philosophical breakthrough, every medical discovery had to start over from scratch because the foundation those ancient scholars built was reduced to smoke and ash. The library wasn't merely a storehouse of information, it was a living, breathing network where Babylonian astronomers debated Greek mathematicians, where Egyptian doctors cross-referenced Indian surgical texts, where the entire known world converged to push the boundaries of understanding. Its destruction didn't just erase books, it erased potential futures. Imagine where we might be if Newton had accessed Archimedes' lost calculus scrolls, or if Renaissance surgeons had studied Herophilus' anatomical diagrams instead of reinventing them centuries later. Yet in a twist of irony, the library's absence has become its own kind of catalyst. The very gaps in our knowledge have spurred generations of historians, scientists, and dreamers to dig deeper, to piece together fragments with the tenacity of detectives solving the ultimate cold case. Modern technologies like multispectral imaging and AI-powered text reconstruction are bridging gaps that once seemed insurmountable, teasing out whispers of lost wisdom from palimpsests and charred papyri. The discovery of Archimedes' erased manuscript beneath a prayer book, or the painstaking digital reassembly of Sophocles' plays from citations scattered across a dozen languages, proves that Alexandria's legacy isn't just about what was destroyed, it's about the relentless human drive to recover, to reimagine, to reconnect. This isn't just ancient history. The library's ghost haunts every hard drive, every server farm, every fragile digital archive holding our own era's knowledge. We face our own version of Alexandria's vulnerabilities: decaying magnetic tapes, obsolete file formats, the chilling possibility of cyber attacks wiping out entire cultural databases in seconds. The lesson isn't to despair but to act. Support your local libraries, advocate for open access scholarship, back up what matters, because knowledge once lost is infinitely harder to reclaim than to protect. The Alexandrians taught us that fire isn't the only threat, indifference is just as deadly, so let's honor those ancient scholars not with nostalgia, but with vigilance. Every time a child checks out a book, every time a researcher uploads an open-source paper, every time we fight to preserve endangered languages or digitize crumbling manuscripts, we're defying the flames that consumed Alexandria. The library's greatest secret wasn't in its scrolls, it was in its radical belief that knowledge belongs to everyone, and that's one truth no fire can ever erase.